Federal investigators do not make unannounced visits to restaurants without cause. They do not simply cross the threshold of a century-old Mexican institution in Tucson, Arizona, a landmark recognized as the oldest family-owned Mexican restaurant in the entire United States, and begin a line of inquiry about a camera crew, unless they possess information that makes such questions necessary. What they were seeking, and the reasons behind their search, form the very core of this story. Because the trail does not end at a restaurant. It leads to a chilling theory about how Nancy Guthrie was selected. And if the investigators' instincts are correct, El Charro Cafe may be the precise location where this entire nightmare was set into motion. Let us begin with the established facts, and then examine where the certainty dissolves into shadow. This case holds a profound complication, an element that has been largely ignored in most public accounts. It was a veteran journalist, one of the few who has consistently remained at the forefront of this case, who revealed in a March 11, 2026 broadcast that FBI agents had visited a Mexican restaurant in Tucson and interrogated its employees. Critically, the report did not specify the restaurant by name. The assertion was that investigators retraced the steps of Savannah and Nancy from their two-day television shoot, a path which included the Mexican establishment. The journalist stated he was informed that federal agents arrived and posed very specific questions to the staff. El Charro Cafe was later identified as that location through its own social media. The establishment had previously posted a video of the television segment being filmed on its premises, an identity later confirmed by multiple news outlets. El Charro stands as the oldest family-run Mexican restaurant in America, the perfect backdrop to reconnect with my mother, Nancy, and my sister, Annie. I make a point to eat here every single time I return home to Tucson. A visit to El Charro is essential. How many years has El Charro been in operation? 103 years. Carlotta Flores has been at the helm of El Charro for more than 50 years, inheriting it from her great-aunt Monica, the very woman credited with inventing the chimichanga. She honored us with a custom dating back to Prohibition, a time when women playing cards would conceal their tequila inside teacups. Cheers. To you. I love you. Don't finish it all at once. And it is at this juncture that the narrative becomes complicated. The Arizona Daily Star, a local Tucson newspaper with reporters on the ground, published a report citing Ray Flores, the president of Flores Concepts and C. Charro, which is the parent company managing El Charro. He claimed that no one from any law enforcement agency had made contact with the restaurant whatsoever. His direct quote was, "We would have talked to the FBI. They never called us." The FBI, adhering to standard protocol, offered no comment regarding the active investigation. So the situation is this. A respected investigative correspondent reports that the FBI visited and questioned staff, while the restaurant's own management insists they have absolutely no knowledge of any such visit. These two accounts are fundamentally irreconcilable. Either the journalist's sources possessed information about an official inquiry that completely circumvented management, or a critical gap exists somewhere in the chain of communication, a gap that remains unexplained. The purpose here is not to settle that particular discrepancy, but the contradiction itself is worth examining for a moment, because it reveals something vital about the current state of this investigation. When a reporter with a reputation for credibility asserts that the FBI visited a restaurant to ask specific behavioral questions, and that restaurant's management flatly denies any contact, one of a few possibilities must be true. Either the sources were misinformed, or the approach was made covertly, bypassing management to engage directly with individual employees. Or the visit occurred in a manner that the president of the parent company would not have been formally alerted to, perhaps as input from other law enforcement channels or facilitated through a third party. In an investigation of this magnitude, with numerous agencies involved and so many investigative threads running in parallel, that final possibility is hardly remote. Federal inquiries do not always proceed through the front door or announce their presence to the building's operator. What can be stated with confidence is that this reporting forms the foundation of the investigative theory being examined here. And the precise questions that agents were said to have asked lie at the very heart of the matter. Because regardless of whether the visit unfolded exactly as described, the questions themselves betray an investigative theory that is terrifyingly real. According to the journalist's sources, agents posed these questions to the El Charro staff. Was there anyone present who appeared suspicious while Savannah was filming with her mother? Did anyone attempt to take photographs? Did anyone become agitated or angry? Was anyone lingering in an unsettling way? Reflect on those questions. These are not the inquiries of an agent simply tying up loose ends. They are not questions designed to complete a procedural checklist. These are the questions one asks when a theory has begun to crystallize, a coherent, evidence-supported belief that a particular person of interest was at a particular place on a particular day and that he was there to watch. The FBI, or at the very least investigators deeply embedded in this case, went to that restaurant looking for someone. But to comprehend the weight of those questions, we must first return to the beginning, to the precise moment El Charro became a focal point for investigators. The story traces back to a particular afternoon in October of 2025, almost 3.5 months before Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, when a network television crew arrived in Tucson. They established their production inside one of the city's most cherished landmarks, and there they captured footage that would eventually be seen by millions. On October 17th, 2025, Savannah Guthrie traveled back to Tucson to film a special feature her network had titled Homecoming Today, a series where its anchors revisited the formative places of their past. The production spanned approximately 8 hours, moving between several key locations across the city, commencing at sunrise within Saguaro National Park. From that point, the crew transitioned to the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum and then proceeded to El Charro for a family lunch. The day's filming drew to a close at her alma mater, the University of Arizona, where she received a warm reception from the university president, the marching band, and her former sorority. But it was the most personal stop of all, the one that holds the most significance for this investigation, which took place at El Charro, where she was accompanied by 2 members of her family. The segment was broadcast nationally on November 5th, 2025. Its tone was warm, infused with nostalgia, and profoundly intimate. It was the kind of television piece that lionizes a city through the memories of one of its own, someone who had grown up there and carried a part of it with her always. Inside the El Charro Cafe, Savannah took a seat with her mother, Nancy Guthrie, and her sister, Annie Guthrie. For several minutes, broadcast on national television to an audience of millions, Nancy Guthrie was framed on screen, seated at a table inside that restaurant. She engaged with her daughter's questions, live on camera. She articulated to Savannah, and by extension to the world, what she treasured about Tucson. "It's so wonderful," Nancy had remarked. "Just the air, the quality of life. It's laid back and gentle." She made a lighthearted comment about javelinas eating her plants. She was present. She was recognizable. She was identifiable. "Mom, you guys came here in the 70s and you had been moving all around. What made you want to stay in Tucson and plant roots? And so wonderful. Just the air, the quality of life is laid back and gentle. Yeah, I like to watch the javelina eat my plants. But the best thing about Tucson is coming home and seeing you guys. Should we raise a glass? Prickly pear margarita. Cheers. Cheers. Love you. Love you. From the love of family to the familiar beauty of the scenery, I will always be a daughter of the desert." In every consequential way, she had been introduced to a vast audience of strangers as Savannah's mother, as an 84-year-old woman who had called Tucson home for decades, and as a figure tied to one of the most visible journalists in American morning news. Now, consider the implications of that introduction from the viewpoint of someone who intended to find her. This broadcast was anything but obscure. It was hosted on the television show's official YouTube channel. It was edited into clips and propagated across countless social media platforms. Local news organizations in Tucson reported on the filming even before the segment was ever broadcast. The Tucson Daily Star provided real-time coverage of Savannah's October 17th visit, making note that the television crew was filming at the University of Arizona and at various local landmarks throughout the city. The segment's existence was public knowledge long before it ever appeared on a national screen. And following Nancy's disappearance on February 1st, 2026, that same segment became a viral phenomenon, watched and rewatched by millions of people attempting to process how such a crime could befall such a family. Observers watching it now, with the chilling knowledge of what was to come, can feel the gravity of every single moment. Nancy, describing the gentle quality of life in Tucson. Savannah, asking her mother what compelled her to stay. An ordinary family meal, filmed on a Tuesday afternoon, that now appears to be anything but ordinary. The question investigators are now exploring is whether a specific individual witnessed that segment, either on October 17th, being physically present somewhere near the restaurant as it was being filmed, or in the period after November 5th when it aired to a national audience, and there made a calculated decision. And this is the piece of information that alters the entire picture. Authorities have been systematically requesting surveillance video from homes near Nancy Guthrie's residence in the Catalina foothills, dating as far back as January 1st, 2026, a full month before she was ever reported missing. The specific dates that investigators have shown the most profound interest in are January 11th and January 24th. Multiple neighbors have confirmed that law enforcement officials appeared at their doors making inquiries specifically about those dates. One resident disclosed that she was questioned pointedly about footage from January 24th, exactly 1 week prior to Nancy's last known whereabouts. The broader neighborhood canvass, however, was initiated to cover the entire month of January. This timeline reveals something of critical importance about the investigators' understanding of this crime. They are not searching for an individual who happened to see Nancy on the street and acted on a sudden, violent impulse. They are searching for someone who had already designated her as a target long before he ever arrived at her home neighborhood. This was about someone whose presence near her Catalina foothills residence in early to mid-January was not accidental. It was intentional, deliberate, and held a dark purpose. The geography here is a crucial piece of the puzzle. The Catalina foothills is not a neighborhood one simply wanders through by mistake. It is an affluent residential area north of Tucson, the kind of insulated community people enter only because they have a specific reason to be there. A suspect who materialized in that neighborhood on January 11th, and possibly again on January 24th, was not disoriented. He was not merely passing through. His presence was predicated on a chilling piece of knowledge, that this was where Nancy Guthrie lived, and that knowledge had to have an origin. Now, introduce the El Charro connection. The television segment was filmed on October 17th. It was broadcast on November 5th. If investigators are correct, that the suspect had already been surveilling the area around her home by January 11th at the latest. Then a haunting question emerges, one that connects those two disparate points in time. It's a question that is logical, deeply disturbing, and one that authorities appear to be taking with the utmost seriousness. Is it possible this individual's first exposure to Nancy Guthrie was through the national television coverage? Did he observe her on that screen, either in person at the October filming or during the November broadcast, and in that moment, make a fateful decision? And do the weeks that stretched between November and January represent a chilling timeline, the period it took for him to graduate from awareness to action, from seeing her to methodically planning? This is the very investigative theory that now casts a long shadow over the events at El Charro. The theory is bolstered by what investigators have pieced together from security camera footage they have managed to retrieve from properties on and around her street. Unidentified individuals appear to have trespassed onto her property on at least 2 separate occasions prior to the abduction. 2 distinct images, captured on 2 different dates. This was someone who was there more than once, someone who made a conscious choice to return. This is not the profile of a man who selected a target spontaneously the night before. This is the profile of an individual already deeply committed to a plan. And the central question occupying the FBI is, where did that plan begin? If its genesis was at El Charro, if someone was lurking in the vicinity of that restaurant on October 17th, watching a network television crew film Nancy Guthrie at her favorite table, then that autumn afternoon was the precise moment she was transformed from a private citizen into a designated target. Before proceeding, it's essential to understand the significance of El Charro itself, because its role in this story is far greater than it might initially appear. El Charro Cafe was established in Tucson back in 1922 by its founder, Monica Flynn. This distinction makes it the oldest Mexican restaurant in the United States under continuous family ownership. The same family has operated it for more than a century. Carlotta Flores, Monica Flynn's great-grandniece and the restaurant's chef, spoke out about the Guthrie family in the days following the disappearance. She painted a portrait of Nancy for the New York Post in warm and specific detail. "I have absolutely nothing but wonderful things to say about their family," Flores stated. "If you imagine your own grandmother, that is what Nancy is like. She's a humble, proud mom who only wants good things for her family. She is proud of her children. She just happens to have a daughter who is in the limelight." That final sentence now resonates with a chilling new meaning. She just happens to have a daughter who is in the limelight. For the person who took Nancy Guthrie, that single fact may have been the entire motivation. A national television broadcast singled her out, placed her on camera in her own city, at her preferred restaurant, and in doing so, made an 84-year-old grandmother accessible in ways she otherwise never would have been. Consider for a moment what El Charro signifies in the public consciousness of Tucson. This is no quiet, hidden cafe known only to locals. El Charro is an institution. It has been a landmark for over 100 years. It attracts tourists. It attracts television crews. It commands the kind of foot traffic and public gaze that a national broadcast featuring a well-known media figure would inevitably amplify. The residents of Tucson are protective of El Charro in the way people cherish institutions that seem to outlast everything else. It is one of those rare places that becomes woven into the very identity of the city. When a famous daughter says on national television, "El Charro is the oldest family-owned Mexican restaurant in America, and the perfect place to catch up with my family," she is doing more than describing a restaurant. She is broadcasting a specific location. She is placing herself and her mother inside a precise, identifiable public space that anyone watching could locate on a map in under 30 seconds. "Every time I come home to Tucson, I have to come to El Charro. How long has El Charro been here?" 100. The filming on October 17th, according to restaurant management, was conducted in a dining room that had been closed off to the general public. But the restaurant itself remained open for business that day, with approximately 50 patrons inside. And the presence of a major network camera crew filming inside a cherished Tucson landmark was hardly a secret. People in and around the establishment were aware that something significant was taking place. Word of the filming spread through the local community. The Tucson newspaper even ran a story about it. The question that investigators are now grappling with is who, exactly, was paying attention and to what. The behavioral questions in agents' reports were pointed. Was anyone seen lingering? Was anyone taking photographs? Was anyone agitated? Were there behavioral red flags? They were describing the profile of an individual whose fascination with the scene went far beyond mere curiosity. This was someone whose attention was fixed, not on the cameras, nor on the celebrated anchor, nor on the complex mechanics of a television broadcast. It was someone whose entire focus was locked onto the woman seated across from them, Nancy Guthrie. To grasp the full picture, we must explore the surveillance theory in its entirety, because the official interest in the restaurant does not stand as an isolated event. It represents a single element within a disturbing pattern, one meticulously pieced together since the 1st of February. We've examined the property's camera footage and the door-to-door canvassing in prior installments. But what follows is the fundamental core of this particular investigative angle. Authorities have been meticulously scrutinizing video archives and interviewing residents. They are looking at dates that stretch back to at least January 1st, 2026, a full calendar month before Nancy's disappearance was ever reported. Investigators specifically pressed neighbors for information about January 11th and January 24th. The subtext is unmistakable. An unknown individual was present in that neighborhood, possibly near Nancy's residence, on those specific dates. An individual whose presence investigators are convinced was anything but coincidental. This is not the pattern of an individual acting on a whim. The presence of someone in the neighborhood 3 entire weeks before the abduction, perhaps on more than one occasion, suggests reconnaissance, a confirmation of the target. It is the kind of calculated, methodical behavior that simply does not occur without a predetermined purpose. The doorbell camera video, released on February 10th, showing a masked and armed man on Nancy's front porch in the pre-dawn hours of February 1st, serves to confirm that very purpose. He arrived prepared. He was masked. He was gloved. He shouldered a 25-liter backpack. He had located the camera and attempted to neutralize it. This was a planned operation. The question for investigators is therefore no longer if this was planned. The evidence overwhelmingly indicates it was. The question now is how far back that planning extends, and at what point his awareness of Nancy Guthrie truly began. The investigative angle focused on the restaurant suggests that this awareness could trace all the way back to October of 2025. If this holds true, we are confronted with a scenario where an individual saw a woman on national television and began a process of identification. He placed her in a particular city, connected her to a distinct social environment, and then he made a decision. Weeks later, he journeyed to Tucson, and he began to watch. And on the night of January 31st, as it bled into the early morning of February 1st, he returned one last time. The reporting from March 11th warrants close inspection, not only for its revelations, but for how we must responsibly interpret them. This journalist has been among the most dependable conduits of information on this case from its inception. His track record throughout the Nancy Guthrie investigation has remained solid, and his sourcing has consistently proven credible. When this reporter brings something to light, it demands serious consideration. And this is what he reported. Investigators revisited locations where the television show had filmed during the previous autumn, which included what he termed the Mexican restaurant. He conveyed to his audience that the FBI had been on site, pursuing leads connected to the television segment, and he stated that agents questioned the staff. Was there anyone present who seemed suspicious while the filming was underway with her mother? Did anyone attempt to take photographs? Did anyone become confrontational? Was there anyone lingering in a way that felt unsettling? Now, this is where we must simultaneously hold two competing facts. This reporting originates from sources, not from the restaurant's official management, nor from the FBI, which offered no comment. Meanwhile, the Arizona Daily Star, conducting its own on-the-ground reporting in Tucson, managed to reach Ray Flores, who is also the president of the restaurant's parent company. He stated unequivocally that the FBI had never initiated contact. "We would have cooperated with the FBI," he said. "They never called." Herein lies a direct conflict in the reporting, one that remains unclarified. It doesn't inherently mean the journalist's sources were mistaken. There are numerous ways a federal inquiry can touch upon a location without involving upper management. Agents might speak informally to individual staff members, or make contact through third-party intermediaries. Maneuvers that the president of a corporate entity might not be privy to. But the discrepancy is tangible, and it is significant. We will not present the FBI's visit as a confirmed fact when the establishment itself denies it. Yet, what we can state with certainty is this. The very questions described, irrespective of how or when they were asked, reflect a genuine theory of the investigation. A theory that an unknown party was observing Nancy Guthrie on October 17th. A theory that the filming of that homecoming television segment was the critical moment Nancy Guthrie became a target for the person who would ultimately abduct her. That is the theory driving this entire investigation forward. One facet of the restaurant segment that merits special focus is the identity of the others at that table. It was not merely Nancy and Savannah. Annie Guthrie, Nancy's daughter and Savannah's sister, was also present for the filming. She is featured in the segment. She was part of that family meal. She was just as visible, sitting beside her mother, on a broadcast that reached the entire nation. The names Annie Guthrie and her husband, Tommaso Cion, have surfaced before in the periphery of this investigation. Their significance is not born of suspicion, but of circumstance, a chilling proximity of their movements to crucial pieces of the timeline. Tommaso Cion holds the grim distinction of being the last person known to have seen Nancy alive before she disappeared. He escorted her to her home in the Catalina foothills at approximately 9:50 on the evening of January 31st, a fact that led investigators to ultimately clear the family of any involvement. Yet, Annie's presence at El Charro remains a critical thread in the surveillance theory, especially if the architect of this crime was watching the Today Show segment. Whether they viewed it in person on October 17th or saw the broadcast in November, their gaze fell upon more than just Nancy Guthrie. They were given a window into the family structure. Savannah, the famous anchor, Nancy, her mother, and Annie, her sister. They witnessed the intimate choreography of a family outing, observing who was part of that circle, how they moved as a unit, and how deeply connected they were. For an individual meticulously constructing a target profile from a distance, without any personal access, this was a trove of invaluable intelligence. It reveals the map of Nancy's connections. It exposes the patterns of her social world. It provides a blueprint for a family evening involving Nancy Guthrie, detailing who would likely be present in her orbit. That television piece was, in effect, an unintentional and deeply vulnerable portrait of the Guthrie family's life in Tucson. And for anyone watching with a predatory gaze, it was all laid bare, bringing us back to the question that has haunted this case from its inception. Was the person who abducted Nancy Guthrie someone from within her own world? The framework of an insider with knowledge has been profoundly persuasive from the very start, driven by the chilling specifics of the abduction itself. The precise timing, the apparent fluency with her routines, the calculated security countermeasures, and the familiarity with the home's layout. None of these are the hallmarks of a random attack. However, the El Charro angle introduces a disturbing variation of the insider theory. It's one that requires no personal relationship, no insider in the conventional sense of the term. In today's world, you do not need to know a person to develop an operational understanding of their life. This was a time before the relentless exposure of morning television, before the age of social media, and before the illusion of intimacy that now shadows the private lives of public figures. Savannah Guthrie is a name synonymous with that visibility, one of the most prominent journalists in America. Her Tucson heritage is no secret. It is a deliberately cultivated part of her public identity. Consider a broadcast segment in which she revisits her hometown, films inside a cherished restaurant, and shares a meal on national television with her elderly mother and her sister. It is precisely the kind of content her audience desires and what her network is engineered to deliver. But seen through the lens of someone with malevolent intent, it transforms into something else entirely, a briefing. A detailed, nationally broadcast dossier revealing that this woman is 84 years old and a resident of Tucson. It shows you her face. It tells you where she dines. It confirms the identity of her daughter and illuminates why that connection is significant. In 6 minutes of warm morning television, it provides the kind of granular, human detail that fosters a false sense of familiarity, making a stranger feel intimately known. If this is the operational model that investigators are now considering, a stranger who compiled a target profile from public data and then conducted field surveillance to refine the operational details, then El Charro is no longer just a restaurant. It becomes the potential point of origin, the very moment a passive awareness of Nancy Guthrie metastasized into a focused, predatory objective. And if that proves true, the line connecting El Charro to the 1st of February is not a coincidence. It is a timeline. In the initial hours and days after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, law enforcement's attention was not directed toward El Charro. That fact alone is profoundly significant. In the immediate aftermath of a high-profile disappearance, law enforcement typically casts a wide net, radiating from the center. They speak with neighbors. They review the most obvious surveillance. Their focus remains on the most recent known movements, working in ever-expanding circles from the point of disappearance. El Charro is geographically removed from Nancy's Catalina Foothills home. It is not within her immediate neighborhood. It is not a location that would surface during a standard initial canvass of the abduction site. For investigators to have pivoted their attention to El Charro, to have posed behavioral questions about the events of October 17th, means they arrived at that location through careful analysis. They arrived through a process of reverse engineering Nancy Guthrie's public footprint, identifying the Today Show segment as an event of potential, critical significance. It means they began to ask, if the suspect first identified Nancy through media coverage, what was the last documented moment she appeared on camera? In public, at a specific location in Tucson? The answer to that question is October 17th, 2025, the El Charro Cafe. Whether detectives physically crossed the threshold of that restaurant or made contact with employees through other channels is unclear. But the fact that the kinds of questions described were being asked at all, reaching the staff in some capacity, reveals the investigative lens has turned backward through time. The search is on for an origin point, an attempt to pinpoint the very moment this sequence of events was set in motion. And as it stands, that moment may have occurred inside a century-old restaurant in a dining room on a Tuesday afternoon in October when a television crew was filming, a family shared a meal, and an unknown individual in the room fixed their attention on a single, vulnerable target. It is essential to address the core question of this report, as those who have followed this case from the start are owed an unvarnished assessment. Is this a genuine breakthrough? It is a term used far too liberally and too frequently in high-profile investigations. A true breakthrough signifies a fundamental shift in understanding, where investigators advance from one state of knowledge to a significantly improved one. It means the picture has gained clarity, and a viable path forward has finally emerged from the fog. By that standard, what we have is not yet confirmed, and perhaps far more complex than initial reports indicated. Here is what we know to be factual. Brian Enton, a credible correspondent, issued a report on March 11, 2026, stating that investigators were posing behavioral questions to employees of the restaurant where a television program had filmed back in October. These inquiries focused on suspicious conduct, photography, displays of anger, and loitering are not random. They point to a very specific and coherent theory of the crime. Here is where the narrative diverges. The management of the establishment claims they were never approached by law enforcement. That discrepancy remains unresolved. Here is what has been verified. The FBI has been systematically canvassing Nancy's neighborhood, reviewing security footage from January 11th and January 24th, and even as far back as January 1st. Private cameras did capture figures on her grounds on several occasions before the abduction. The footage from her doorbell camera reveals a masked, armed, and gloved individual on her porch during the pre-dawn hours of February 1st, a figure whose approach was clearly premeditated. And this is what remains unconfirmed. No person of interest has been officially named. There have been no arrests. As of this report, no suspect has been publicly identified. And still, the thread of logic that connects El Charro to the greater timeline is compelling enough to warrant a serious examination. If the perpetrator first identified Nancy during the October filming, or the subsequent broadcast in November, then the 8 to 10 weeks separating that exposure from his first confirmed appearance in her neighborhood constitute a window for planning a deliberate, methodical phase of preparation. This was not impulsive. It was not chance. It was a plan. El Charro, the restaurant, whether or not federal agents ever actually walked through its doors, stands as the potential genesis of that entire operation. It is crucial to analyze the behavioral implications behind the questions that agents were reportedly asking, because they are anything but arbitrary. They reveal a distinct investigative posture that requires a deeper understanding. The question about photography, for instance, is a classic indicator of surveillance. Those who are in the process of targeting another human being will often document their subject. They take pictures of people, of their surroundings, and of all potential points of entry and exit. They construct a visual archive to facilitate their planning. Imagine someone present at El Charro on October 17th who was taking photographs not of the television crew, the well-known host, or the production itself, but was instead singularly focused on tracking and capturing images of the older woman seated at that table. Such an action constitutes a significant behavioral flag, an action so significant that it justifies inquiries months after the fact. Because pictures taken on that day could have provided clues about which neighborhood Nancy might reside in, the vehicle she might operate, or the route she took after the filming concluded. The inquiry about anger points toward what criminal profilers refer to as a response of entitlement. This describes an individual who is fixated on a target but is then prevented from gaining access, whether by physical distance or the controlled logistics of a film set, or by security and staff who are keeping the public at bay. This individual might react with a level of frustration that seems utterly disproportionate to the circumstances. To an outside observer, it might simply appear as if someone is having a particularly bad day. Yet, in the setting of a restaurant where most patrons are either enjoying a meal or observing a unique event with curiosity, a person who becomes visibly upset because they are unable to approach one specific individual at one specific table, that behavior is an anomaly. It gets noticed. And when viewed through the lens of a kidnapping investigation, it transforms from simple irritability into something far more sinister. The question about lingering is possibly the most direct, and in many ways, the most revealing. It seeks to identify someone who remained long after their reason for being there had expired. An individual who positions themselves to keep a direct line of sight on a particular person, even after the event that drew the crowd has concluded. Someone who fails to depart when filming concludes, or perhaps even circles back to a vantage point near the table. Restaurant staff possess a keen sense of observation, honed over years of experience, allowing them to detect when a customer's presence shifts from unremarkable to something else, something difficult to articulate. For the FBI to ask about lingering suggests a belief that someone at El Charro on October 17th might have been perceived as simply off. Not overtly threatening, not causing alarm, but distinctly out of place. And that quiet, unsettling feeling, when considered in light of all that followed, may now constitute critical evidence. When viewed together, these three behavioral markers, obsessive documentation, a response of entitlement, and persistent proximity. This describes a person who had already committed to a course of action before ever setting foot in that restaurant, an individual whose presence at El Charro was anything but a matter of chance. It is critical to pause and move beyond the cold mechanics of the investigation to confront what this theory truly signifies for a family already enduring an unimaginable trauma. The daughter's return to Tucson in October of 2025 was, at its heart, an act of profound love. The piece she created was both joyful and intimately personal, the very essence of what morning television aims to be. She was seated across from her mother, at a table in a restaurant that had likely been a silent witness to her entire life. She asked her mother on camera what it was that made Tucson feel like home. Nancy's reply was broadcast to an audience of millions. That unassuming afternoon has since become a central piece of a federal investigation. If the prevailing theory holds, someone was watching that segment. That person identified Nancy as a target, then used the information shared on national television to find and ultimately abduct an 84-year-old woman. If this is true, an act of pure warmth and familial love was unknowingly twisted into a weapon against the very people who shared it. The fault for this does not lie with the daughter. It does not lie with her mother. It does not lie with their family. Appearing on your daughter's television show is not a transgression. Going to your favorite restaurant is not an offense. And sharing with the world what you love about the city you have called home for 50 years is certainly not a crime. But it is an inescapable reality of the world that public figures and their families are now forced to inhabit. A world where the very openness that builds a career in the public eye also defines the acute vulnerability of anyone who appears within that camera's frame. A world where a 6-minute homecoming segment can reach the one person who should never have been watching. Carlotta Flores, speaking to the New York Post about the family, said of Nancy, "She just happens to have a daughter who is in the limelight." In the chilling context of this investigation, that simple phrase now carries a sinister weight it was never meant to bear. At the time of this recording, the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance remains a high-priority, active case. Nancy was reported missing on February 1st, 2026. She has not been located. No arrests have been made. No official charges have been filed. The investigation is now deep into its 7th agonizing week. The reward for information leading to Nancy's return, or to the identification of those responsible, stands at $1 million from the family, with an additional $100,000 from the FBI. To this day, neither of those rewards has been claimed. What has been assembled over weeks of reporting and confirmed disclosures is a body of evidence and a set of investigative paths that paint an increasingly specific picture of this crime's likely execution. This is true even as the identity of the person responsible remains, publicly, an unresolved enigma. The canvas of neighborhood surveillance has established investigative interest in dates extending back to January 1st, with a sharp focus on January 11th and January 24th. The doorbell camera footage, released on February 10th, shows a masked, armed individual on Nancy's doorstep who had meticulously prepared for the encounter. The subject was concealed, masked, gloved, carrying a 25-liter backpack, and was acutely aware of the camera's location. That individual has not yet been publicly identified. DNA gathered from the scene has undergone processing. Some samples return no matches from the national database, and investigators have confirmed that additional forensic material is still under analysis. Multiple ransom notes sent to media organizations have been investigated, with numerous deadlines passing without any confirmed payment. Several individuals have been brought in for questioning and have since been released without charges. Property cameras located on and around Nancy's home have provided additional footage showing individuals on the grounds on dates prior to the abduction. A major news outlet reported on March 18th that two sources briefed on the investigation confirmed these images exist, though they do not show the same masked figure from the doorbell video. Sheriff Chris Nanos stated in mid-March that investigators believe they understand the motive for why Nancy Guthrie was targeted. He declined, however, to reveal that motive and cautioned that they are not yet 100% certain. He also issued a stark and unusual warning to the public, stating that citizens should not assume the suspect poses no threat to them. "Don't think for a minute," he said, "that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you're safe. That is not the sort of declaration a lawman makes when an investigation is narrowing cleanly. It is the kind of statement that stems from a genuine and profound uncertainty about whether the threat has truly been contained. And so the investigative thread, which traces Nancy's public footprint backward in time, through the television segment, through El Charro, to the afternoon of October 17th, suggests that wherever the physical search is now focused, the timeline of the crime itself has reached much further into the past than most people had initially conceived. They are not merely looking for what transpired on February 1st. They are searching for what began in October. If you have followed this case from its inception, you understand we do not release an update unless there is something of genuine substance to examine. We have examined this case with the rigid discipline of never moving ahead of the established facts and the solemn responsibility to avoid presenting contested information as if it were confirmed. This particular chapter is a critical component of the series precisely because of what the El Charro angle of inquiry reveals about the central hypothesis of this entire investigation. Irrespective of the contention over whether agents physically crossed that threshold, the prevailing theory is this. Nancy Guthrie was not selected by chance. She was singled out, perhaps from a national television appearance, perhaps through direct, in-person surveillance during a public filming, or possibly through a confluence of both, and then she was methodically observed for weeks, with chilling purpose and calculation. That hypothesis casts every other piece of evidence we have analyzed in this series in a profoundly different light. It reinterprets the neighborhood surveillance in January not as the start of a selection process, but as the final confirmation of a target already chosen. It transforms the property camera recordings into evidence of an individual who had already locked onto a plan long before setting foot in that community. It recasts the masked, gloved, and armed figure on the doorbell camera as the terrifying final act in a drama that was set into motion months prior at a restaurant table on a Tuesday afternoon in October. El Charro sits at what could be the very genesis of that sinister plan. A restaurant in October, a broadcast in November, a neighborhood in January, a front door in February. Whether the FBI ever entered El Charro is secondary. What is clear is that investigators are tracing a timeline, and they are following it backward toward its origin point. This is the juncture where an element of the police investigation guided them toward the El Charro Cafe, toward the oldest, family-run Mexican restaurant in the United States, established in Tucson in 1922, and toward the afternoon of October 17, 2025, when a Today Show production crew established a set inside a cordoned-off dining room and captured an intimate moment between a celebrity anchor and her mother. And the fundamental question that this investigative focus raises is identical, no matter which version of the story you consider. Was someone else watching Nancy that day? Not the production crew, not her famous granddaughter, not the spectacle of a national broadcast taking place in their cherished local establishment. But Nancy, the 84-year-old woman at the table, the unassuming, dignified mother from Tucson who had frequented El Charro for her entire life. The prevailing investigative theory answers with a chilling affirmative. Someone was watching, and what that person saw put something terrible into motion. If that hypothesis is sound, if the timeline from El Charro to February 1st is a factual one, then this investigation is attempting to uncover more than just the identity of Nancy Guthrie's abductor. It is a search for the exact moment of inception, the precise instant this individual decided to take her the moment she was transformed from a private woman living her life in Tucson, Arizona, into a designated target. Authorities are posing the correct question. They simply have not yet found the answer. The search persists. The task force carries on its work. The evidence is being methodically dissected. The neighborhood security footage from January is under exhaustive review. The DNA collected from the scene continues to undergo processing. The tips and leads continue to arrive. And somewhere within all of it, in the silent footage, in the behavioral forensics, in the investigative threads that are slowly being pulled, taught an answer resides. They inquired about El Charro because they hold the conviction that someone was observing Nancy that day. And indeed, someone was. If you have followed us this far into the depths of the Nancy Guthrie case, you are already aware that every fragment of new information reconfigures the shape of all that came before. Each installment in this series is a single strand, and those strands are now beginning to intertwine. Stay with us.